A man sits in silence, staring at an empty space on the living room floor, a place where his best friend once lay. That friend was not another person, but his dog, the one living being he believed would never betray him. 6 months later, the woman he loved most in the world would collapse to the ground, her life taken by the same hands that once held her gently. And it all began with a single irreversible act. She had eaten his dog. Before we go any deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Tom Evans grew up in a small working-class town in the Midwest. His life was ordinary. Weekdays spent at the auto shop where he repaired engines, weekends filled with fishing trips and beer with neighbors. To outsiders, he seemed like every other man who carried the weight of blue-collar work and simple pleasures. But there was one thing that made Tom different: his unwavering bond with his dog, a Labrador named Buddy. Tom often joked that Buddy wasn't just a pet, he was family, the one constant in a life that often felt unstable. He spoke of him with the same pride other men reserved for children. For Tom, the world might have been full of disappointments, but Buddy was pure, loyal, and unchanging. Mia Epper entered Tom's life unexpectedly. She was warm, charming, and carried a sense of resilience shaped by her own struggles. Having bounced between jobs and housing situations, Mia was searching for stability when she met Tom. He offered her a roof, companionship, and a steady presence she hadn't known before. Their early months together were tender. They cooked in a small kitchen that always smelled faintly of garlic and onions, laughed while washing dishes side by side, and spent quiet evenings watching reruns of old sitcoms. Friends said the couple seemed mismatched. Tom reserved and serious, Mia vibrant and restless, but together they found a rhythm. Still, one subtle crack remained. Mia often teased Tom about how much he adored Buddy. What Tom considered devotion, she sometimes treated as over-attachment. Life in their shared home unfolded with the usual ups and downs. Bills came due, work schedules clashed, and the small frustrations of daily life sometimes led to raised voices. But there was always Buddy, a calming presence that seemed to ease Tom's temper and soften Mia's edges. When arguments grew too loud, Buddy would retreat to a corner, waiting until silence returned before nudging Tom's head with his nose. In many ways, Buddy was the bridge between them, the reminder of peace when tension ran high. For Tom, the idea of losing Buddy was unthinkable. The dog was not just company, but the symbol of unconditional love, something he had rarely felt in his life. He confided in Buddy more than in any human being, convinced that this animal could sense every unspoken word in his art. Mia's perspective was different. She appreciated Buddy, but didn't share Tom's intense attachment. Her worries were practical: rent, groceries, debt that never seemed to disappear. Some nights she lay awake listening to Tom whisper to the dog in the dark, wondering why his affection seemed to flow so easily toward Buddy and not always toward her. That quiet resentment, mixed with her own struggles, planted seeds of conflict that neither of them knew how to address. Tom thought of Buddy as irreplaceable. Mia, though, sometimes thought of him as a reminder of where she stood in Tom's life. Second. Then came the evening that changed everything. The house smelled of cooking, rich and savory. Tom walked into the kitchen expecting to see Mia setting dinner on the table. Instead, he noticed Buddy's absence. At first, it was just a quiet unease. Buddy always greeted him, tail wagging. But that night, the silence was sharp. When Tom's eyes scanned the counter, then the pot simmering on the stove, realization struck with the force of a blow. The smell wasn't comforting anymore. It was horrifying. The dog he loved, the friend he trusted with his life, was gone. And Mia, standing in the corner with trembling hands, had made a decision Tom would never forgive. She had killed Buddy, and worse, she had eaten him. Tom froze in the kitchen doorway, his chest tightening as if the air itself had been stripped away. The smell of cooked meat, once familiar, now felt grotesque. He didn't need an explanation. He knew instantly what had happened. For a moment, his body went numb, unable to register the full weight of the betrayal. This wasn't just about food. It wasn't even about survival. This was about trust, about love, about the one sacred thing in his life that had now been taken from him. Buddy had been more than a dog. He had been his anchor, his family, his source of unconditional comfort. And now he was gone. Tom's legs trembled beneath him, and in his mind he replayed years of companionship, every walk, every wag of the tail, now twisted into a single horrific truth. The woman he loved had taken it all away. In the days that followed, silence became their language. Tom no longer spoke to Mia, choosing instead to isolate himself in the garage, where the smell of motor oil masked the emptiness inside the house. Meals went untouched, and when Mia tried to explain herself, he simply stared past her, as though her words carried no meaning. She claimed she had been desperate, that hunger had clouded her judgment, that she hadn't known how else to cope. But to Tom, every justification felt hollow. He heard only excuses where he had expected remorse. To him, it wasn't just the act, it was the choice. She had made a conscious decision to destroy the one thing he held sacred. That choice replayed in his mind every night, fueling anger that began to replace grief, wrapping itself around his heart like barbed wire. The house that once held laughter now felt like a tomb. Their shared bed became two separate spaces, Tom retreating to the couch, Mia curling up alone in the bedroom. Even the walls seemed to echo with their distance. Mia tried small gestures, leaving notes on the kitchen table or folding his laundry in silence, but nothing softened the heaviness between them. Tom could not forgive. He saw Buddy's absence in every corner, the empty dog bowl, the unused leash hanging by the door, the quiet backyard where no bark greeted the neighbors anymore. Each reminder stabbed deeper than the last. He began to avoid coming home altogether, lingering at work long after shifts ended, or sitting in his truck long past midnight. The home they had built together was no longer a place of refuge. It was a constant reminder of betrayal, grief, and the ghost of a friend he could never get back. Friends and family noticed the change. Tom's sister Janet urged him to move on, insisting that no animal, no matter how beloved, should not cost him his peace of mind. But to Tom, such comments felt like salt on an open wound. People didn't understand that Buddy had been more than a pet. He had been the only steady bond Tom had ever trusted. Mia's mother offered to buy them another dog, speaking as though a replacement could somehow erase the loss. But Tom recoiled at the idea. Buddy wasn't replaceable, not in this lifetime. The suggestions only deepened his isolation, making him feel that no one could comprehend the depth of his pain. He began to withdraw further, his conversations reduced to nods and shrugs, his world shrinking until only his grief remained. 6 months passed, but for Tom, time did not heal, it only hardened. The tension in the house became unbearable. Meals were consumed in silence, if at all. Mia moved through the rooms like a shadow, her attempts at reconciliation met with cold indifference. She tried to explain again, tried to remind him of the love they once shared, but her words could not reach him. To Tom, every smile seemed forced, every apology insincere. Nights grew colder, the distance wider. He spent hours replaying old memories of Buddy, his paws in the hardwood, his breath against his hand as he fell asleep, his loyal gaze that seemed to see through every hurt. The more he remembered, the more unbearable the loss became. Grief transformed into bitterness, and bitterness festered into something darker. A storm was gathering inside him, and neither of them knew how close it was to breaking. Mia, for her part, was unraveling too. She regretted what she had done, even if her reasons felt valid to her at the time. Hunger, desperation, poor judgment, whatever had driven her, was now irrelevant, because the cost was more than she ever imagined. She felt Tom's eyes on her, not with love, but with something colder, something frightening. In the quiet moments, she wondered if she was safe in her own home. But leaving was complicated. She had nowhere else to go, no savings to start over, no family she could turn to for support. So she stayed, hoping each day that time might soften Tom's heart.
But yet, as the months dragged on, hope slipped further from her grasp. She lived under the same roof, but in truth she was already a prisoner of her own choices and of Tom's unforgiving silence.
The night that everything came to an end began like any other. Tom sat in the darkened living room, the faint hum of the refrigerator echoing from the kitchen, the only sound in a house that once held warmth and laughter. He hadn't spoken to Mia in days, not beyond the bare minimum of words that passed like stones between them. His body was weary, but his mind churned with restless thoughts, replaying Buddy's face, Buddy's loyalty, Buddy's absence. The silence weighed heavier than ever before, pressing against him like a physical burden. Mia lingered in the hallway, her footsteps hesitant as though she could sense the danger pulsing in the air. That night, the house was not just quiet, it was suffocating, filled with the weight of two people who no longer knew how to exist together, trapped in grief, resentment, and memories that refused to fade. Mia finally stepped into the living room. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She looked at Tom with a desperation that carried both apology and fear. For 6 months, she had tried to bridge the gap, to offer words that might heal what she had broken, but every attempt fell flat, every effort rejected. Tonight, she tried one last time. Standing in the doorway, her voice trembling as she spoke softly, though Tom no longer heard words, only echoes of betrayal. In his mind, Buddy's absence was louder than any plea she could make. Every syllable reminded him of what was gone forever. And with each passing second, his anger coiled tighter, turning into something unrecognizable, something dangerous. In that moment, he was no longer the man who had once loved her. He was someone else entirely, consumed by grief, unable to see beyond the shadows of his loss. Tom's hand reached for the drawer beside the couch, where a pistol had been hidden for years. It was meant for protection, a precaution he had justified long ago, but tonight it became something else entirely. His hand trembled as he wrapped his fingers around the cold metal, the weight of the weapon both foreign and familiar. He lifted it slowly, his breath uneven, his vision clouded by memories of Buddy bounding across the yard, the sound of his bark filling the air. The gun became the physical embodiment of his rage, his grief, his inability to let go. Across the room, Mia's face shifted from confusion to terror as she realized what he was holding. The moment stretched into eternity, seconds that felt like hours as the line between thought and action began to blur, and Tom's pain teetered on the edge of irreversible violence. The shot rang out, shattering the silence with brutal finality. Mia's body collapsed to the floor, her breath cut short, her eyes wide with shock before closing forever. For a moment, the world stopped. Tom stood frozen, the gun still in his hand, smoke curling upward as though marking the moment when his life, too, ended in a different way. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with the echo of what could never be undone. Tom's chest heaved as reality slowly set in. He had destroyed not just Mia's life, but his own. Everything he thought he loved, everything he thought he couldn't bear to lose, and now spiraled into this moment. Buddy was gone, Mia was gone, and he was left standing in the ruins of choices he couldn't take back. Choices born from grief that had hardened into something far more devastating. In the immediate aftermath, the weight of what Tom had done pressed down on him like a crushing tide. He dropped the gun, the clatter against the hardwood echoing through the room. His knees buckled and he sank beside Mia's body, staring at her lifeless face. The anger that had fueled him moments before evaporated, replaced by a hollow emptiness that consumed him whole. His hands shook uncontrollably as he tried to comprehend the magnitude of his actions. There were no words left, no apologies that could erase what had happened. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of his ragged breathing.
Tom realized with chilling clarity that in trying to avenge the loss of the companion he cherished most, he had condemned himself to a different kind of death. The death of freedom, of love, of any future beyond this night. Neighbors would later recall hearing the sound, a single shot cutting through the stillness of the evening. Lights flicked on across the street, blinds shifted as curious eyes peeked out into the darkness. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights filled the neighborhood, sirens piercing the night air. Tom sat motionless on the floor, his hands stained, his eyes vacant when officers entered the home. They found him beside Mia's body, unresisting, broken. He offered no explanation, no struggle. There was nothing left to fight for. The arrest was quiet, almost mechanical, as though even the officers sensed the futility in cuffing a man who seemed already imprisoned by his own mind. Tom's life as he knew it had ended, not with the loss of Buddy, not with the loss of Mia, but with the choices that chained him to grief, until it finally consumed everything.
The crime scene was grim, a small house transformed into the setting of a tragedy that would soon ripple far beyond its walls. Officers moved with quiet precision, their radios murmuring updates, their faces marked with the practiced detachment of professionals who had seen too much. Yet even among them, there was a heaviness that lingered. One officer later admitted that the sight of Mia on the floor and Tom sitting beside her like a man hollowed out stayed with him for weeks. Evidence was collected, the gun, fingerprints, a timeline pieced together from neighbors who had heard shouting in the past. It wasn't just another case file. It was a story of love, grief, and violence that left everyone uneasy. This wasn't a random act of brutality. It was something far more intimate, rooted in a wound that had festered until it exploded in the most irreversible way. At the station, Tom remained silent. Detectives asked questions, but he barely moved, answering only in short, mechanical phrases. To them, he was a man emptied of will, his confession implied in the stillness of his demeanor. When asked why, his only words were that she had taken his dog. To the detectives, it seemed unbelievable, absurd even, that a life had been ended over something they could not fully grasp. But to Tom, Buddy had been more than a dog. He had been family, memory, and meaning. That explanation, simple as it was, revealed the depth of his unraveling. What others dismissed as irrational was to him the most rational explanation of all. He wasn't trying to excuse himself, nor did he seem intent on defending his actions. He simply stated the truth as he saw it, and then he returned to silence, lost in thought. News of the crime spread quickly. Local headlines captured the story with a mix of shock and disbelief. A man had shot his girlfriend after she killed and ate his dog. The details were too grotesque, too unsettling to ignore. Neighbors expressed disbelief, saying Tom had always seemed quiet, respectful, even gentle. Others spoke of the visible strain in the couple's relationship, recalling how distant they had seemed in recent months. The community debated fiercely, some condemning Tom as a murderer beyond redemption, others pitying him as a man broken by unimaginable grief. It wasn't just a crime anymore. It was a story that forced people to question what love, loss, and loyalty could drive someone to do. In coffee shops, barber shops, and small-town diners, the tragedy became a topic of hushed conversation, a haunting reminder that violence often begins in the most ordinary of homes. When the trial began, the courtroom was filled with a tense silence that spoke louder than any words. Mia's family sat together, their grief etched into every glance, while Tom's relatives watched with a mixture of disbelief and shame. The prosecution painted Tom as a dangerous man, arguing that no amount of grief could justify such violence. They described Mia as a woman who made a desperate, reckless decision but did not deserve to die for it. The defense took a different approach.
portraying Tom as a man shattered by loss, whose mind had been consumed by an obsession he could not control. They argued he was not a monster, but a man whose love had twisted into something destructive. Each side delivered its narrative, but the truth lay somewhere in between, a complicated intersection of choices, emotions, and pain that no verdict could truly resolve. Witnesses took the stand, neighbors who described months of tension, friends who recalled Tom's deep attachment to his dog, and family members who spoke of Mia's struggles with money and stability. Every testimony added another layer, painting a picture that was neither black nor white, but shades of gray. Some jurors struggled visibly with the weight of what they heard, their expressions shifting as they absorbed the tangled story of love, betrayal, and violence. The judge reminded them that their task was not to understand grief, but to determine responsibility. But how could anyone separate the two? How could they ignore the way love, loss, and desperation had intertwined so tightly that it ended in death? The courtroom became less about the law and more about the human condition, exposing how fragile the line between devotion and destruction could truly be. When the verdict was finally read, the room seemed to hold its breath. Tom was found guilty of second-degree murder, the judge noting the lack of premeditation but recognizing the gravity of the act. He was sentenced to decades in prison, a punishment that ensured he would spend the rest of his life confined within walls that mirrored the confinement of his grief. Tom showed little reaction as the sentence was handed down. He did not plead, did not cry, did not speak. He simply stood, his face pale, his eyes hollow, as though the verdict had been decided long before the trial began. From Mia's family, the ruling brought a measure of justice, though no comfort. For Tom, it was merely the formal confirmation of what he already knew. His life as he knew it was over.
Prison became Tom's new reality. The walls were gray, the lights harsh, and the sounds of metal doors closing echoed through every corridor. For most inmates, adjustment was slow and painful. For Tom, it was strangely immediate. He moved through each day as though he had already been serving a sentence long before he arrived. In his mind, he replayed the moment over and over. The kitchen, the silence, the gunshot. Nights were the worst. He lay awake in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, haunted not only by the memory of Maya's final breath, but by the absence of Buddy. Grief came in waves, sometimes numbing, sometimes unbearable, but always pleasant. He began to write in a small notebook, his words more confessions than reflections. In them, he admitted that what he had lost wasn't just a dog or a partner. He had lost himself. Those who read Tom's writings later described them as both heartbreaking and unsettling. He wrote about Buddy in vivid detail, the smell of his fur after rain, the warmth of his body pressed against his feet during cold winters, the trust in his eyes that made Tom feel human. He wrote about Maya too, though his words for her were conflicted. Sometimes he expressed regret, acknowledging that she had been desperate, vulnerable, and perhaps more broken than anyone had realized. Other times, his anger flared again, unable to forgive what she had done. But more often than not, his entries turned inward. He questioned his own worth, his choices, his inability to let go. The notebooks revealed a man wrestling with the unanswerable, a man whose life had been consumed by love, grief, and a single act of irreversible violence that left scars deeper than prison walls. Beyond the prison walls, Maya's family struggled to make sense of the tragedy. Her mother often said she could not understand how desperation had led her daughter to such an unthinkable decision. Maya had never been perfect, but she had been human, flawed, scared,
and searching for a way to survive. To them, her death was not just the end of a life, but the extinguishing of hope that she might one day have found her footing. At memorials, friends remembered her laugh, her resilience, the way she could make people feel welcome, even in hard times. Yet beneath those memories lay the haunting knowledge that her life had ended in violence, and that the man she trusted most had been the one to end it. For her family, the wound was permanent, a reminder that love and danger can sometimes exist in the same home, with devastating consequences. The tragedy left the community divided. Some believed Tom was a monster, someone who had chosen violence over forgiveness, someone unworthy of pity. Others saw him as a man destroyed by grief, a cautionary tale of what happens when sorrow festers unchecked. In reality, both perspectives carried truth. Tom's act was unforgivable, but his pain was undeniable. The community wrestled with uncomfortable questions. How much weight does grief hold in shaping a person's choices? Can desperation excuse betrayal? Can love ever justify violence? These questions lingered long after the trial ended, forcing people to reflect on their own lives and relationships. In quiet conversations, neighbors admitted they had seen hints of tension, but never thought it would lead to something like this. The tragedy became a mirror, reflecting the fragility of trust, the danger of silence, and the devastating cost of wounds left unhealed. One of the most haunting revelations came when investigators uncovered Maya's personal journals. Hidden behind old boxes, they revealed a woman carrying struggles she had rarely voiced aloud. She wrote of hunger, of shame, of feeling overshadowed by Tom's love for Buddy. She admitted to moments of resentment, feeling like she could never compete with the loyalty of a dog. But she also wrote of love, her deep, conflicted love for Tom. Her words revealed a portrait of desperation, not malice. She hadn't acted to hurt him. She had acted because she felt cornered by life itself. Those revelations arrived too late. In his cell, he received copies of her journals as part of the evidence released after trial. He read their words slowly, sometimes shaking, sometimes crying, sometimes staring at the page until the ink blurred through his tears. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that Maya had been fighting battles he never truly saw. He had been blinded by his devotion to Buddy, unable to recognize the depth of her suffering. In his grief, he had judged her, condemned her, and finally destroyed her. The journals did not absolve her actions, but they gave them context. And in that context, Tom saw himself not as the man betrayed, but as the man who had failed to save the woman he once loved. That realization became his true punishment, far heavier than the years carved into his sentence.
Years passed, and Tom remained behind bars, his life reduced to routine and reflection. Outside, the world moved forward, but inside, time carried a different weight. Each day was a reminder of what he had lost: Mia, Buddy, and the life he once believed was unshakable. Some inmates sought freedom in denial, convincing themselves they were victims of circumstance. Tom never did. He carried his guilt openly, as though it was the only honest thing left in him. Guards said he rarely spoke, rarely caused trouble. He seemed to exist only in memory, his body present but his spirit forever trapped in the night of the shooting. For him, the sentence was not just years of confinement. It was the endless replay of a single decision, one that could never be undone, one that left 2 lives destroyed and many others scarred in silence. Mia's story became a warning, told quietly among those who knew her and written about in articles that tried to make sense of the tragedy. Some painted her as reckless, others as a victim of circumstance. But to those closest to her, she was simply human, a woman who loved, who struggled, who made mistakes, and who paid the ultimate price. Her life was more than her final act, and yet that act overshadowed everything else. For her family, justice had been served, but peace never came. They carried her absence every day, an emptiness at birthdays, holidays, and quiet evenings when they wished she could simply walk through the door again. Her memory was both comfort and torment, a reminder of how quickly love can turn to loss when pain and misunderstanding take control of a home already weighed down by silence. Looking back, this story was not only about a man, a woman, and a dog. It was about the fragile balance of love, loyalty, and survival. It showed how grief can consume, how desperation can drive, and how silence can destroy. Tom and Mia were not villains in a simple tale. They were two people caught in the web of their own pain, unable to see the path toward healing until it was far too late. Their story forces us to ask ourselves uncomfortable questions. How do we treat the ones we love when they are at their weakest? How much can grief shape our choices? And how quickly can loyalty turn into obsession? These are questions without easy answers, but they remind us that tragedies like this are not born in a moment. They are built slowly in the quiet fractures of everyday life. As you've listened to this story, ask yourself, what would you have done if you were Tom? Could you forgive the one who took something you loved most, even if they acted out of desperation? Or if you were Mia, would you have trusted your partner enough to confess your struggles before they drove you to a desperate act? These are the reflections that stay with us, not because they offer solutions, but because they force us to confront the fragility of our own choices. True crime is never just about the crime. It's about the people behind it, their fears, their flaws, and the lessons they leave behind. This case may be shocking, but at its core, it is a reminder of how vital it is to see, to listen, and to act with compassion before silence hardens into tragedy. Before we end, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Stories like this are painful, but they are important. They remind us that love, grief, and desperation are universal, and that any of us could find ourselves facing choices we never imagined. May Mia's memory serve as a lesson, and may Tom's fate remind us of the cost when anger eclipses understanding. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. Until next time, take care of yourselves and those you love, because sometimes the smallest choices we make are the ones that carry the greatest weight.